The investigator slid a folder across the table and said, Captain Reyes, walk me through how $40 million just disappears from a budget you swore you were watching every single day. I remember looking down at my own signature on a page I never signed in my life and thinking, someone wanted me gone before I ever got the chance to prove I belonged here. But 6 months earlier, none of this would have made sense to me either. My name's Dana Reyes. I was 34, a logistics captain in the Army, and this is the story of how the same men who said I couldn't handle command tried to bury me with the very budget they handed me, and how a 22-year-old private ended up saving my career. I'd spent 11 years earning this, not asking for it, earning it. 2 deployments, a master's I finished at 2 in the morning between shifts, and a reputation for being the officer who actually read the fine print. When my battalion commander announced I'd be taking over as comptroller for the whole brigade's sustainment budget, $40 million a year, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, actually sitting in my chest instead of just exhaustion. Not everyone felt that way. I walked into my first budget review and heard Major Holt, the outgoing officer, tell someone in the hallway, loud enough that I was clearly supposed to hear it, she'll be crying in the S4 office by October. Nobody laughed. Nobody had to. I just filed it away, the way you learn to file away every comment like that, and told myself I'd let the numbers speak for me. My office was small, 2 desks and a whiteboard covered in vendor names, but for the first few weeks it felt like mine in a way nothing else in my career had. I had a team of 4, Master Sergeant Diaz running the day-to-day, a couple of specialists, and a young private who mostly filed paperwork nobody else wanted to touch. I made a point of learning every one of their names, their kids' names, whether they took their coffee black. I thought that was what good leadership looked like. I still think it was. I just didn't know yet that it wouldn't be enough to protect me. For a while, they did. I tightened 3 vendor contracts in my first month and saved the brigade almost $200,000. I thought that would shut people up. It didn't. It just changed the shape of what people said about me, from she can't handle it to something quieter, something I couldn't quite hear yet, happening in offices I wasn't in. The first crack came on a Tuesday, buried in a routine reconciliation. A supply requisition for fuel and vehicle parts, $180,000, approved under my digital signature on a day I'd been at a medical appointment 2 hours away. I hadn't touched a computer that whole afternoon. I remember sitting there, staring at the timestamp, feeling that specific kind of cold that has nothing to do with the temperature in the room. I brought it straight to Master Sergeant Diaz, my senior enlisted advisor, expecting him to be as alarmed as I was. Instead, he shrugged and said, "Probably a system glitch, ma'am. Happens more than you'd think." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him, honestly, because the alternative meant someone inside my own shop had access to my credentials. I let it go. That was my first mistake, and it wouldn't be my last. 2 weeks later, it happened again. A different requisition, this time for communications equipment, $62,000, again under my signature, again on a day I could account for every single hour of. I went back to Diaz, and this time I didn't ask. I told him I wanted an audit trail pulled on both transactions. He got a strange look on his face, something between annoyance and something I couldn't name yet, and said, "You sure you want to open that door, ma'am? Things get messy when you go digging in a system this old." I told him I didn't care how messy it got. I should have listened harder to how fast he tried to talk me out of it. If you've ever had a coworker try to talk you out of protecting yourself, you already know that specific feeling in your stomach. It's not quite suspicion yet. It's just static, a wrongness you can't name. Around that same time, I noticed something smaller, something I almost didn't clock at all. Meetings I used to be looped into started happening without me. A vendor contract renewal got signed off a day before I was supposed to review it, with a note that said leadership had wanted to move quickly. Nobody told me it had been fast-tracked. I found out from an email chain I'd been quietly dropped from. Each thing on its own looked like nothing. Stacked together, it looked like a door slowly closing. 3 weeks after that, Major Holt showed up at a brigade briefing I wasn't invited to and stood in front of the colonel with a printout of transactions with my name on them, saying he had concerns about oversight in the comptroller's office. I only found out because a friend in S3 texted me a photo of the slide. Holt hadn't even had the nerve to say it to my face first. He went over my head to a room I wasn't allowed in, with numbers he knew I hadn't approved. I confronted him in the hallway outside his office. I asked him directly why he was presenting discrepancies to the colonel before he'd said a single word to me. He looked almost bored when he answered. "I figured you had enough on your plate, Captain. Didn't want to burden you." I told him that wasn't his call to make. He smiled, this small, satisfied smile, and said, "We'll see." I didn't understand yet how much weight was behind those 2 words. The breaking point came fast after that, faster than I was ready for. I was called into the colonel's office on a Thursday morning and told that, effective immediately, I was being relieved of my duties as comptroller, pending an investigation into $340,000 in unauthorized transactions across 2 months, all tied to my digital signature. I sat in that chair and watched 11 years of proving myself collapse into a folder on a desk. Someone had already told my own soldiers before I got the chance to. I walked back to my office, and half of them wouldn't make eye contact with me. That night I sat in my car in the parking lot for almost an hour before I could make myself drive home. I kept thinking about Holt's comment in the hallway, months earlier, about crying in the S4 office by October. It was November. He'd missed his own prediction by exactly 1 month, and somehow that felt worse than if he'd been right. I'll tell you what happened at my hearing in a minute, because you need to understand who actually cracked this thing open first. And it wasn't me. Her name was Private Anna Cortez, 22 years old, 6 months into her first assignment, working the help desk that managed system access logs. She found me in the parking lot 2 days after I was relieved, looking nervous enough that I almost told her to go back inside before she got in trouble for talking to me. Instead, she said, "Ma'am, I think I know how those transactions got signed under your name, and I don't think it was a glitch." She'd noticed something nobody else had bothered to check, because nobody else had looked past the surface. Every fraudulent transaction had been logged from a terminal in the S4 office, after hours, on days when the badge logs showed I'd swiped out of the building hours earlier. One person's badge, though, had swiped back in each time, Master Sergeant Diaz's. I asked her why she was telling me this, instead of just reporting it up her own chain. She looked at me and said something I still think about. "Because everyone already decided you did it, before anybody checked the logs." I checked the logs. I almost cried right there in that parking lot, not from the accusation anymore, but from the sheer relief of one person actually looking. She'd pulled 3 months of badge swipe records against 3 months of terminal login times, cross-referenced by hand, because she didn't trust the automated report to catch what she was looking for. She showed me on her phone, sitting in that parking lot with the engine off and the cold coming through the windows, a spreadsheet with my name on one column and a set of timestamps on another that simply didn't line up with where I'd actually been. I asked her how long she'd been working on it. She said 3 nights, after her own shift ended, because she kept thinking about how it could just as easily have been her name on that page instead of mine. Would you have trusted a 22-year-old private over a master sergeant with 12 years in? I almost didn't, not because I doubted her, but because I was terrified of what it would mean if she was right, and what it would mean about who I'd trusted for months. We took it to the Inspector General's office together, not up my chain, because my chain was exactly the problem. The IG pulled full forensic logs on every terminal in that building for the past 90 days. It took them 9 days to confirm what Anna had already found in an afternoon. Diaz had been quietly diverting funds through inflated vendor invoices for almost a year, going back long before I ever took the job. And when I started tightening contracts and actually reading the fine print like I'd promised myself I would, I became a threat to something that had nothing to do with me at all. Holt hadn't known about the fraud. He'd just seen an opportunity to push out an officer he'd never wanted in that seat in the first place, and he hadn't cared whose reputation he used to do it. The confrontation happened in a conference room with an IG officer, a JAG attorney, and Diaz sitting across from me for the first time since this started. He didn't apologize. He barely looked at me. When the investigator laid out the badge logs next to the transaction timestamps, he finally said, quiet, almost bored, "I figured nobody would check that far back." Not a denial, just disappointment that he'd gotten caught. I asked him directly, in that room, why he let me sit in a hearing about to end my career when he knew exactly what he'd done. He didn't answer that one. He just looked at the table. I think that silence told me more than anything he could have said. Diaz was formally charged, and eventually separated from service under conditions I'm not going to pretend I felt sorry about. Holt received a formal reprimand for bypassing the chain of command and presenting unverified allegations to senior leadership, which effectively ended any chance he had at his next promotion board. It wasn't the dramatic justice you see in movies. Nobody frog-marched him out in handcuffs. But in an institution built on your record following you for your entire career, a reprimand like that follows you into every room for the rest of your time in uniform. I was fully reinstated, cleared of every allegation, and 6 weeks later I was handed something Holt never expected me to get anywhere near: command of the sustainment battalion itself. The $40 million budget that almost ended my career became the thing I was trusted to run at a level even higher than before. I made sure Ana Cortez's name was in every report that mattered, because she's the only reason any of this came out the way it did. I still ask myself sometimes if I could have seen it sooner, if I'd pushed harder the first time Diaz brushed off that glitch. I don't know. I think sometimes the people closest to a betrayal are the last ones equipped to see it, because trusting your own team isn't a weakness, it's the whole job. If you've ever had someone underestimate you right up until the moment you proved them catastrophically wrong, you already know exactly what that hearing felt like, when the truth finally landed on the table, instead of me. I walked out of that building that day and sat in my car again, except this time I wasn't dreading the drive home. I just sat there for a minute, let it actually land, and then I drove home and slept better than I had in months. Tell me honestly, would you have trusted the 22-year-old over the master sergeant? Because I almost didn't, and that's the part of this story that still sits with me the most.